Welcome to Lecture 3. Today we're going to focus on some special situations that you're likely to encounter in your career that are going to cause you to alter your documentation a little bit. Okay. Throughout your career, you're going to find yourself in many situations that cause you to adapt your approach and your documentation to that call's specific needs. However, in this lecture, we're only going to focus on a number of more common type situations. What we really want to look at is going to be first the crime scenes. How do we document the things that we encounter in a crime scene? How do we document patient statements? How do we document when we find a patient who is not in need of resuscitation, a DOA or a dead on arrival? And we're also going to look at motor vehicle collisions and a few things that are very unique to those that we need to make sure that we include in our documentation. So first off, we're going to look right here at the crime scenes. Obviously, there are many things that need to be considered when you're dispatched to a crime scene, but we're going to focus in on a few of them. There are also some considerations you need to take when documenting the patient care and your surroundings. So we want to look at what we need to document, what is different about while we're en route to the crime scene, while we're actually on scene, and specific things about the patient care. And then we're going to look at some things on how to document patients' direct quotes and other things that they may say. First, we need to look at what happens when you're en route to the scene. It's really important for you to note and document whether or not you staged prior to your arrival to a crime scene. Whenever you document this, you need to make sure that you include a few things. You want to include where you staged, the time that you arrived, both at the staging location and when you arrived on the actual scene, any details from dispatch that you may have received about the crime scene, who was on the scene prior to your arrival, for example, a hazardous materials unit, law enforcement, and you need to document who determined that it was safe for you to enter. Okay. Now next, while you're actually on the scene, you and your crew's safety is your number one priority. Should you ever feel threatened while you're on scene, you must leave immediately and notify law enforcement. While you're on scene, it's important that you document and you note any apparent dangers that you see while approaching the patient. If there's the presence of any weapons, alcohol bottles, or drug paraphernalia, you need to document where you saw them at. You also need to document anything that you may have had to alter in order to provide patient care at the scene. If you had to move any furniture or any weapons to a safe location, you may need to document those so that way law enforcement can have a track of where things were before EMS got there, and as they're taking photos and doing whatever that it is that they have to do, they can see why things were moved and where they were originally. Another thing that's really important to remember is that while treating your patient, if you ever have to expose a patient that was stabbed or shot, when removing the clothing, you never want to cut through a bullet hole or a hole that was caused from a knife. This information is very important to law enforcement in processing the crime scene. If it ever happens by accident, you need to make sure that this information is documented so that law enforcement will know. Now, when you actually arrive to the patient, regardless of what happened, whatever the crime scene may be, it is your job to provide high quality care, regardless of whether your patient was the victim or the perpetrator in whatever crime it may be. It is not our job to alter our care to reflect our opinions about a crime scene, just as our opinion is never needed and should never be inserted into documentation. Our opinion should never be inserted into our patient care as well. When you are treating a person injured in a crime, you become that patient's advocate, and it is your job to make sure that that patient gets the highest quality care available to him or her. You also have an ethical and legal responsibility to document your treatment and the observations that you have while you're on scene. Documenting injuries accurately and all pertinent statements in their own words is very important. Now, I want to talk to you a little bit about how to document patients' direct quotes and how to document statements that you may not remember their specific words. However, it's still something that's important to document. Now, this goes for no matter what the scene or no matter what the situation. However, it's very important while on a crime scene or on something where their statements may have a legal ramification. When you are documenting the patient's statements, you need to make sure that you're accurate. Now, whenever you're quoting a patient verbatim, you need to place that patient's statements in quotation marks and be very clear of who said them. We have an example here. The patient stated, quote, "I may have had 2 beers," end quote. Now, whenever you're unsure about what the patient's exact words were, now you never need to put those in quotation marks. However, it still may be information that is important to include in your documentation. Now, if that's the case, then you need to make sure that you're very clear of who said it and attempt to be as accurate as possible. We have an example here that kind of incorporates both of them. The patient stated, quote, "I may have had 2 beers," end quote. However, the patient's wife stated he was a known alcoholic. She also stated that she witnessed him drinking approximately 6 to 10 12-ounce beers in the last 4 to 5 hours. So that's really important. Now, this can go for crime scenes. This can go for any time that you document a patient's quote, even if it's, as we saw in our last lecture, the patient's chief complaint. You can put those in quotes. Quote, "My chest is feeling tight," or quote, "I just do not feel very well." So that's important to note. Up next, we're going to look at dead on arrival. There will be times when you are called to a patient who is deceased and does not need resuscitation. In this instance, it's very important to document why you elected to forgo resuscitation. Now, you should have all covered the things that you need to look for when determining whether resuscitation is needed. But in our documentation, we cannot just simply state that the patient did not need resuscitation. We need to show why we elected to forgo resuscitation. If present, the following things need to be included in your documentation. Whether the patient was pulseless and apneic, you need to look to see if the patients had fixed and midpoint pupils. Check for dependent lividity, and if so, document that. Document the presence of rigor mortis, the beginning of decomposition, the general body temperature, whether the patient felt cold or if they were still warm, and any obvious irreversible signs of death. That would be decapitation, severe dismemberment, something like that. Now, lastly, we want to look at motor vehicle accidents or motor vehicle collisions. The motor vehicle collision happens every single day, and these range from everything from a minor fender bender to rollovers with entrapped patients or patients that were ejected. Now, because of this, it's crucial that we as EMS providers are able to communicate the severity of an MVC to the receiving facility. It is important that we keep in mind the phrase, "paint a picture with your words," when we are documenting the scene and other details of these kind of calls. When you're documenting motor vehicle collisions, you really need to focus in on your scene size up. It's very important to ensure that you not only know what to anticipate with your specific patient, but it also helps you to communicate these crucial details in your report. It's very tempting whenever you show up on an accident to head straight for the patient. However, when treating your patient, you need to know a lot of things about what happened during that accident. You need to know what bystanders said as far as describing the accident. You need to know what kind of damage was done on the outside of the vehicle, so that can help you to predict the kind of injuries that you may see in that patient. Now, the same way that this information helps you in your specific patient care, this same information is going to help the receiving facility know what to look for, what to start gauging and pointing their assessment towards. And there's a few things for your scene size up that you need to make sure is included in your documentation. You need to try to find out and document the approximate rate of speed that the patient or that the vehicle was traveling. You need to document the type of impact, whether it be frontal, a lateral impact, rollover, anything like that. The type of vehicle, that's something that a lot of people don't document, and at times it's not very necessary. However, we have here a head-on collision between a compact car and a cement truck will yield much different results than the same collision between 2 Honda Civics. So sometimes it's important to note the type of vehicle because it may have not provided very much protection, or the type of vehicle that it struck or surface that it struck may be of specific interest to the receiving facility. You need to look and document any intrusion into the passenger compartment, any presence of hazardous materials that may be on that accident. Once you get to the passenger, or you start to look inside the passenger compartment, there's a number of things that are really, really important. You need to find out whether the use of belt restraints were used, such as a seat belt, lap belt, shoulder belt. You need to look for the deployment of airbags. You need to check the windshield for spider webbing to see if the patient's head struck that. You need to document any deformity to the steering wheel, any broken brakes or gas pedals, deformities to the dashboard, the use of child safety seat if there was an infant or a child present, or any possible loose projectiles. Some other important details that you need to document are whether or not there was a death of a passenger in that same compartment. If the other patient died because of the injuries that they sustained, there's a very good chance that the other patient may have experienced some of those same forces that killed the other patient. You need to document any entrapment, any lengthy extrication, or any emergency lifting or carrying techniques that you may have to use while rescuing the patient. In summary, almost every call requires the EMT to tailor his or her documentation to that call's specific needs. However, some of the things that we've looked at are calls that you may experience every week. So it's really important to have a focused mindset when approaching these calls and already have documentation in mind while you're on scene or while you're with the patient. It's the EMT's job to quickly determine what details are pertinent to his or her patient's situation. There's a lot of information that you're going to come in contact with, and being prepared before you get to that call is going to help you know what you need to be looking for and what's not important, so you can be excluding that information from your documentation. And as you gain some experience, you're going to see what details are the most important to different kind of calls. And that's really where reviewing your calls with your partner, while you're doing your clinicals, with your preceptor, with other classmates, these become very important because they may see something that should have been treated, or some techniques or some assessments that should have been done, but they may also see, when reviewing specific reports, some things that you should have documented, or maybe that you documented but you could have worded a little bit better. And during your clinicals, I really suggest that you discuss all your calls with your preceptor. Try to use their experience to the best of your ability, whether it comes to teaching you assessment skills, specific techniques for procedures, whatever it may be. It's just as important to get that same experience writing narratives, because everyone has written a narrative and left something out, or experienced a type of call where they had to alter the way that they had their documentation in order to provide accurate professional documentation. All right, that concludes lecture number 3. In lecture number 4, we're going to look at the thing that is the number one cause of lawsuits against EMS providers, and that's the patient refusal.